Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And we're now on our fourth day covering one verse, which means it's an important verse. And I saved the most difficult for last. So the easier part is first. If you find it's difficult, wait till you get to the last part. The last part is dealing with Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu's Tattva Sandarbha, the commentary. Basically, it's Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary on Tattva Sandarbha, explaining this verse and defeating Mayavad philosophy. So, I'll read the verse, and there are three different references. Oh, Uddhava! Both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless, and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. Remember the question at the end of the previous chapter was, please explain to me how one living entity can be sometimes called Nitya Siddha and sometimes Nitya Buddha, and because Nitya means eternal, so how does that work? Please explain. And Krishna's response was, your question is inappropriate, because living entities are transcendental to the influences of Maya. Now, sometimes living entities are subject to Maya, so then it's appropriate. In that case, it's appropriate, but transcendentally speaking, living entities are neither liberated or conditioned, and an explanation is the liberating potency and the conditioning potency, or vidya, avidya, and vidya, they're products of Maya. So, Paramatma Sandarbha of Jiva Goswami is discussing Paramatma's overseeing Prakriti. So what Prakriti does has its connection with Paramatma. So this avidya and vidya potency is directly under the heading of Paramatma Sandarbha. So how does this work? In these words of Bhagavad Gita, the view of the atheists is described. 16:8. Quote, they say that this world is unreal, that there is no foundation, and that there is no God in control. It is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Next. Thus, in these words of Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures, the philosophy of atheism is described. Here, that's Bhagavad Gita 16:8, the word asatyam means unreal. It cannot be said that the world is both real and unreal, which connects with the defeat of Mayavad philosophy. So remember what's being said here. It can't be both real and unreal, this world. Here, apratishtam means, quote, there is no foundation. Pratishta, foundation. Apratishta, no foundation. Here, the Bhagavad Gita verse says, quote, because they think that God is created by the imagination, the atheists think that they themselves are God. Therefore they say that there is no God, Anishwaram. They say that we have created the world, Jagat, ourselves, aparaspara sambhutam, because of our beginningless ignorance. Now you see the connection. with what Krishna is saying in this verse and what atheists have to say. They say that we have created the world, Jagat, ourselves because of our beginningless ignorance. And we have created it out of the desires of our minds, kama, aitukam, as one creates things in a dream. That is the meaning. Bhagavad Gita 16:8. Next, the atheist and demons are also described in these words, the previous verse of Bhagavad Gita 16:7. Quote, those who are demonic, do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness nor proper behavior nor truth is found in them. And the following, 16:9. The faults of the demons are also described. Quote, following such conclusions, the demonic, who are lost to themselves and who have no intelligence, engage in unbeneficial, horrible works meant to destroy the world, unquote. In this way, the demons' activities are criticized. The demons say that the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are all illusion. Maya. Check it out, it's Mayavad. And that the Lord's glories are created by the imaginations of living beings. They say that the Supreme Lord's creation of the material world is all mythology. Next, in his commentary on Vedanta Sutra 2.1.14, Shankaracharya asserts, quote, corroborating, the characterization of Mayavad philosophy. The names and forms of the all-knowing Supreme Personality Godhead are figment of the imagination. They cannot be described with words. No one can say whether they are real or not. They are created by the souls in the material world. They are manifested from the illusory potency Maya. They are material. This is described in Shruti and Smriti. Next. These ideas are refuted by the Supreme Lord himself in these words, this morning's verse. O Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. But both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. Next. This impersonalist and atheist philosophy is called Mayavada, or the philosophy of Maya. In the Padma Purana, Uttarakanda, in the course of describing the scriptures of the blasphemers and atheists, Lord Shiva tells Goddess Parvati. This is an important reference. He uses, it's right in Padma Purana, he uses the word Mayavada, because sometimes the Shankara followers say, oh, you people, you just make up terminology. And the reply is, no. I mean, specifically even, because ISKCON is like vocal about Mayavad. The Shankara followers criticize ISKCON for using this term. They don't like it. They like, Advaitavad. Because Mayavad sounds pejorative. So they don't like it. So they say, you made it up. And then we say, it's in Padma Purana. And they say, it's not in Padma Purana. And so there's editions, non-ISKCON editions of Padma Purana that have it there, this verse I'm going to read. And they say it's interpolated. And then we say, no, wait a minute, going back to around the time of Shankaracharya, there's comments referring to this very same verse from Padma Purana. So it's not like an ISKCON thing or a new thing. It's recognized, and these are the authorities that make reference to it. So the back and forth goes on, but it's an important reference. Translation in English: the Mayavada philosophy is impious. It has covered Buddhism. Right in Padma Purana, it's covered Buddhism. Lord Shiva is saying, my dear Parvati, in the form of a Brahmana in Kali Yuga, I teach this imagined Mayavad philosophy. Now, the Puranas are written before Lord Shankaracharya, before Shankaracharya appeared, before Lord Shiva appeared. So he's saying what's going to happen in the future. Both Buddhism and Mayavad occurred later after the Puranas. That's one of the reasons why I say it's interpolated. Next, similarly, in explaining Vedanta, I describe the same Mayavad philosophy in order to mislead the entire population toward atheism by denying the personal form of the Lord. 2 verses. Padma Purana. Next, in order to bewilder the demons, the Supreme Personality of God himself ordered Lord Shiva to preach the Mayavad philosophy to bewilder the demons. This is confirmed in the following quote from both Padma Purana and Shiva Purana, where the Supreme Personality Godhead tells Shiva, quote, in Kali Yuga, mislead the people in general by propounding imaginary meanings for the Vedas to bewilder them. Next is a reference from the Upanishads, Gopal Tapani Upanishad. Here's the Sanskrit, text 19 from that work. Yatra vidya vidyena vidamo vidya vidyabhyam bina vidya mayo hiya sakartam katam vishayi bhava titi. Translation: he who is separate from material vidya and avidya, near whom vidya and avidya cannot exist, he who is filled with the chit shakti, how can he be a material enjoyer? There's a reference that's confirming, of course, what Krishna is saying, but the avidya and vidya potency are Krishna's potencies, but far from him, as Maya is far from him. He doesn't touch Maya. Maya doesn't touch him. Commentary. Krishna's great difference from the jiva is stated. Vidya and avidya are aspects of Maya. Then quoting this verse, this morning's verse. I won't read it again. Even in his proximity, we do not know vidya and avidya, since expanding as antaryami, he controls both. He is the unseen controller. Paramatma. He controls Prakriti. We don't see him. From Vishnu Purana. The Shakti of the universe is situated as a portion of a 10,000th of Vishnu. Thus, he is different from both Vidya and Avidya. He is situated separately. Arjuna says, Bhagavatam 1.7.23, you are the original Lord, the controller beyond material energy. You are situated in your spiritual form, being one with your spiritual energy, separate from your material energy. The reason is given, filled completely with Chit Shakti of Mahavidya. Read it again. Filled completely with the Chit Shakti of Mahavidya, how can he be a material enjoyer? Okay, now comes the tough part, and the long. Before I begin, he drills down further. We've read some 2 sections that's addressing Mayavad philosophy, and that this verse refutes Mayavad philosophy. But now we're going to go deeper. It says, follow along with Jiva Goswami. And a little preliminary lesson on terminology. How Brahman becomes covered is a problem. Because if Brahman becomes covered, then that which covers Brahman is greater than Brahman. But you can't have that if you're my body. So you have to say the covering is false. It doesn't even exist. It's a shell game. So to say how Maya covers Brahman, they have at least 2 explanations. One is the reflection explanation, and the other, I'll go through it. There's upadis. What's upadi? Upadi is a designation. We heard, well, maybe not here in Chicago, these vidya and avidya, they're designations upon the soul, because the soul is neither vidya or avidya. The soul is transcendental. So they're designations or upadis. So we know sarva upadi vinir muktam. That one we all know. So how we normally hear it is, I'm not American, and I'm not a male, and I'm not a sannyasi, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. Because thinking I'm any one of those things, that's an upadi. It's not who I am. It's a designation. That's not who I am. I have a body, etc., etc., etc. I have a passport. I have fingerprints. I have facial recognition. But that's not who I am. Then, those coverings, that the classic example from Scripture is a puddle or a pond is covering land. It's actually land. It's just a little bit of water covering land. So it's really land, but we say pond or lake or puddle. But it's really earth. So to say pond or puddle, we know it works to say what it is indicating, but really it's just a covering over something. That's the classic example. So there's upadis that cover Brahman. Not just covering, there's this word that's used, it's a little tricky, delimiting. We know what limiting means. Delimiting means creating boundaries. It's a term that's used in real estate, like people put up a boundary wall. That's a delimiting demarcation. Delimiting. So rather than saying limiting, it's delimiting. That is a dictionary definition, determining the limits or boundaries of. So upadis delimit Brahman. Now land is, it's artificial in one sense. You put up a boundary wall, and then later you move the boundary wall, someone buys 2 properties, and whatever it is. So it's artificial. So their idea is these upadis are delimiting Brahman, because really all there is Brahman. So what's the upadi? Well, one argument or one perspective is paricheda. Paricheda, I'll read. In the word-for-word translation, it means of limitations. And here's a more complete. It's the air that's within the pot, or sky that's within a pot. You break the pot, and then it's no sky within the pot anymore. It's just sky. That's the Paricheda example. So here's the jiva's limiting adjunct, the subtle body, is actually a false covering superimposed on the jiva after he comes in contact with Maya's avidya potency. And it is this false covering alone that makes him appear to be separate from Brahman. The vidya potency makes one have the sense of being separate from Brahman because all we are is Brahman. So what is it? It's a vidya potency that delimits Brahman into thinking it's a subtle body. That's the product of the avidya potency, and one thinks whatever one thinks. Thus, when Brahman is limited by subtle bodies, it becomes the jivas. But when it is limited by vidya, it is called the Ishvara. No, limited by vidya. This is their idea. So vidya is a means of liberation, but what's on the other side of liberation is you're beyond vidya. Because you're just Brahman. Say it again. So the language is important. They hold the same idea as what Krishna is saying in this verse. That there's both avidya and avidya are products of Maya. What's Maya? Maya is an upadi. It's a delimiting thing. Entity. And it doesn't even exist. But somehow that which doesn't exist covers that which does exist. And through avidya. And you bring vidya into the picture, and avidya is gone. And now you're Brahman again. Mumbo jumbo. But they also, I'll just read it again. When Brahman is limited by subtle bodies, it becomes the jivas. But when it is limited by vidya, it is called the Ishvara. So their idea is Ishvara is also a non-existent entity, absolutely non-existent entity. What does exist is one thing. Brahman. So even if you think, yeah, I'm Brahmasmi, and I'm a controller, that's also an upadi, because there isn't anything but Brahman. So that's Paricheda Vada, or doctrine of Paricheda. To break the pot, and the air that's in the pot merges with the air that's in the sky. So break this subtle body thing that says, I'm a jiva, just annihilate it. And you're now situated in the vidya state, and reading Vedanta and chanting Om and things like that help you get there. And then you're again Brahman. Because you never were anything but Brahman. So that's Paricheda. This verse is addressing it. We'll get there. And then there's another one. We're more familiar with the other one. Pratibimba. Pratibimba means reflection. This, Maya, is a reflection of Brahman. Now what the reflecting surface is and how it becomes reflected and so forth, it's another story, but it's a reflection. That Maya covering is a reflection. Here's the teaching. According to Pratibimba Vada, Pratibimbavada, the reflection ideology. When the formless, undivided Brahman is reflected in the various subtle bodies made of avidya, it appears to be many, just as the one sun reflected in various receptacles of water appears to be many. When the jiva frees himself from illusion by contact with vidya and achieves liberation, he reverts to his original Brahman consciousness. This is one Mayavad version of how the jiva comes into being. There's no such thing, because all there is Brahman. So how did we get in this situation? Reflection, pratibimba. Then the avidya potency covers Brahman. That's the upadhi, covers Brahman, and we start to think in terms of I'm me. When actually we're not me, we're Brahman. So back to that's just definition of terms. If there were empirically real upadhis, so is Maya real or not real? Is the vidya avidya real or not real? Is what covers the living entity real or not real? If there was empirically real upadhis delimiting Brahman in either of these two ways, a person could not escape from them simply by knowing he is one with the Supreme in essence. The delimiting force doesn't disappear because you know that you're one with Brahman. And if the Advaita monists propose that freedom from upadhis is due to the influence of the Supreme Entity, who is called Sat, Tat, then they agree with us. Now that's Jiva Goswami's Anuchhed in Tattva Sandarbha. He's refuting Mayavad philosophy. And here's his commentary, or Baladev's commentary, from Gopi, titled Refutations of Pratibimba and Parichedavada. Srila Jiva Goswami here exposes further complications that arise from accepting Brahman's upadhis as empirically real. The Advaita monists believe that a jiva can become free from bondage to his upadhis by becoming educated through the Shrutis. This is the idea of the following Shruti statements. Then it gives a series of them. Tatvamasi, Tat Atmanam Eva Vidhaham Brahmasi, means it knew itself. I am Brahman. That's how they translate it. Here's another one. The means to liberation is knowledge arising from such dictums as Tatvamasi. Here's another one. Mundaka Upanishad. He who knows that Brahman becomes Brahman. Here's another one. The knower of the self transcends grief. So those are important statements from the Shrutis that Shankara followers say, see? You just need to study the Shrutis and know that you're Brahman and you're out of your material existence is over. You're liberated. Thus, with the apparent support of Vedic scripture, the Mayavad school claims that liberation is achieved through knowledge. Indeed, the Shruti says, quote, only by knowing that's the Tat word again, or Brahman, can one transcend death. There is no other way to cross over. And it seems that Krishna says the same thing in Bhagavad Gita 4:37. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities. And in the next two verses, chapter 4, the Lord says, nothing is as purifying as knowledge, and having attained this knowledge, one quickly attains the supreme peace. Paragraph. In fact, Mayavadis think the jiva is like a rich man's infant son who has gotten lost in a busy public place and is then found by a poor man. As a result of this misfortune, compounded by the son's ignorance of his true identity, the baby grows up in a humble setting as the child of a poor man. Later, the child may be recognized by one of his father's servants. As soon as the boy comes to realize that he is the son of a wealthy man, all his poverty evaporates. He does not have to toil hard to get rid of this poverty. In fact, he was never really poor, just ignorant. And thus simply coming to a proper understanding of his real identity was sufficient to reverse the situation. So, cultivate knowledge. You get liberated. Another example. A person forgets that he put his watch in his pocket and searches for hours, but without any luck, finally a friend comes along and sees the watch strap sticking out of his pocket and tells him, hey, your watch is in your pocket. And once the person has the watch and his anxiety is gone, knowledge alone was sufficient to relieve his distress. Paragraph. Similarly, the Mayavadis say the jiva is nothing but deluded Brahman. As soon as he realizes this, by properly hearing the Vedic instructions, he becomes liberated. He then understands that Brahman is not distant from him, for in fact he himself is Brahman. His only obstacle is ignorance, which hearing the Vedas has now removed. Of course, for the process to be effective, one's heart must be pure, and to achieve this purity, Sripad Shankaracharya recommends sadhana chatushtaya, or fourfold practice, consisting of discrimination, dispassion, the 6 achievements, and eagerness for liberation. Paragraph. According to Shankara, one of the 4 Mahabhakyas, or essential statements of all Vedic instructions, is Tattvamasi, you are that. Now, this is like a little guided tour, mini, of Advaitavad. You know, there's volumes and pages and lots written, so it is just a little capsule summary. But there are, according to Shankaracharya, there are 4 Mahabhakyas within the Shrutis that govern all the other ones. So you're supposed to understand all the other ones by understanding these 4. They're governed by these 4. These are emperor verses. And all the kings are governed by the emperors. And so he dwells a lot on these 4. So Tattvam Asi, you are that. Brahman, you are Brahman. Tat. It's a pronoun. That. You are that. But that refers to Brahman, according to him. This statement underlines the oneness of the jiva with Brahman. But we have to ask, since Brahman is all-pervading, and all-knowing, while the jiva is atomic and limited in knowledge, how can they be the same? To this, the Mayavadis reply that Tattvamasi should not be understood in its primary literal sense, but only in a secondary sense. Here comes the jugglery. One can recognize the actual oneness between the Jiva and Brahman when one puts aside their opposing qualities, that is, on one side, omnipresence and omniscience versus atomic size and limited knowledge, and recognizes only their mutual quality of consciousness. This process is called Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana, or applying a metaphorical meaning to a phrase by avoiding part of a word's literal meaning or some of its qualifications. I hope you're enjoying learning Mayavad philosophy. But this verse, expanded by Jiva Goswami, is defeating Mayavad philosophy. No, it's not in the verse. Jiva Goswami is expanding how this verse applies to misconception, proper conception. Thus, one can realize the true oneness between Brahman and the Jiva only when he puts aside the upadhi that delimits Brahman into becoming a Jiva. Got it? The upadhi isn't real, but nonetheless it delimits. Or it's an upadhi covering Brahman, but it's not real. Thus one can realize the true oneness between Brahman and the Jiva only when one puts aside the upadhi that delimits Brahman into becoming a Jiva. To help in this realization, the Guru instructs the disciple, you are that. Since the Shruti statements cannot be meaningless, Shankara contends, this is the only way to understand the Mahavakya. Have somebody who's a Mayavadi train you up. Paragraph. Srila Jiva Goswami answers this whole argument by pointing out that even when a Jiva is absorbed in hearing the Vedic sound conveying the knowledge that he is one with Brahman, the upadhi covering the Jiva, which is empirically real, will not magically dissolve. A man bound by chains will not become free just by meditating that his fetters are cut. A rabbit will not turn into an elephant just by meditating, I'm an elephant, I'm an elephant. Such achievements would be possible only if upadhis were merely apparent. An intoxicated office clerk may think that he is the President of the United States, but when he becomes sober, he understands he is still just an office clerk. If the upadhis covering Brahman are real, the task of removing them is not so easy. Mere knowledge is not sufficient to liberate the Jiva from Maya. Paragraph. This is, the vidya and avidya potencies. If knowledge alone were actually sufficient for liberation, why do scriptures recommend various austerities, penances, and rituals for self-purification? The Mayavadis can only say that these are preliminary steps for purifying the heart, for qualifying one to understand the meaning of the Shruti Mahavakyas. Paragraph. But according to the Shastras, now comes this morning's verse, knowledge, vidya, and ignorance, avidya, are both products of Maya. So, even if a Jiva, by studying Vedic texts, gets rid of his avidya, with the help of vidya, he'll still be bound by vidya. How will he do away with the other upadhi, vidya? Until he is freed from all upadhis, he cannot realize Brahman, which is beyond both vidya and avidya. Lord Krishna discusses this point with Uddhava in the 11th canto, this verse. I'll read it. Oh, Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless, and they perpetually award living beings liberation and bondage, respectively. Paragraph. Here the Lord explicitly states that vidya is also a product of Maya. When he says that vidya gives liberation, Subal's not here. He's listening. It's on the altar. Okay. This is his question yesterday. When Krishna says that vidya gives liberation, he does not mean that vidya alone can grant it. Because no one can actually become free from Maya without surrendering to the Supreme Lord. He emphatically declares this to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita 7:14. Daiviyesha gunamayi mama maya duratya mamiva papajante maya metam trantite. This divine energy of mine, Maya, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. Only those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. We're not done yet. The term vidya means, quote, knowledge, and also, quote, devotion. Now, there's some that don't see vidya means devotion. They just see knowledge, and, devotion is sentiment. That's another material thing. So we don't have any sentiment around here. We just have knowledge. But it actually implies knowledge with devotion. In Upanishadic statements such as tam eva viditvat ati mrityumeti, the word viditva, after knowing, really means, quote, by being devoted to him, fully knowing his essence, viditva. It does not mean having knowledge without devotion. Krishna confirms this in Bhagavad Gita 4:9, janma karma chime divyam, etc. Here, the same root, vid, to know, is being used. And in this context, it means knowing with devotion. Paragraph. We're getting there. We're almost done. Material knowledge. That's like the Upanishad, the Ishopanishad reference you made, right? Between vidya and avidya. It's material knowledge. Material knowledge is the feature of Maya, whereas transcendental knowledge about the Lord is manifested by the illuminating power of bhakti, an aspect of the Supreme Lord's internal potency. Spiritual knowledge is inseparable from bhakti. The process of hearing, or in other words, receiving knowledge, is in fact listed first among the 9 processes of devotional service. A passage from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad bears out our conclusion that vidya indicates knowledge with devotion. Quote, Vinaya pragyam kurbita. After knowing, one should practice wisdom. Here, the word used for wisdom, pragya, conveys the same meaning as vidya, and so the sentence indicates, quote, after knowing him, one should practice devotion. Also in Bhagavad Gita 9:2, the Lord says, Raja Vidya, this is the king of knowledge. From the context, it is evident that here, vidya means devotional service. Thus, it is devotional service and not mere knowledge that cuts the bonds of Maya, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 7:14 and confirmed later in Bhagavad Gita 11:53 through 54. Quote, the form that you are seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing severe penances, serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am standing before you, and thus can be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. Final paragraph. If the Mayavadis respond by suggesting that it is possible for the jiva to remove all upadhis and become Brahman by the mercy of the all-powerful and benign Brahman, Srila Jiva Goswami is glad to accept this idea, since it amounts to surrendering to the Vaishnava view. The Advaita monist insists that Brahman is devoid of all attributes and potencies, but it is the same Brahman. But if that same Brahman is now required to bless the jiva, then it has to have some potency, namely mercy. By allowing featureless Brahman to have any potency at all, the Mayavadis conform to the Vaishnava definition of Para-Brahman as Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In that case, Srila Jiva Goswami says, Asmakam eva mata sammatam. Their view agrees with ours. In the Bhagavad Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami will prove that even for Brahman realization, one must take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Coming attractions. Next, Srila Jiva Goswami exposes the fallacies of the second alternative, and namely that Brahman's upadhis are unreal. It's the shell game. It's real, but it's not real. It's not real, but it's real. So, I hope you enjoyed hearing. We're in this Uddhava Gita section, we're getting a foundation for Bhagavat Tattva. Truths about Bhagavan. And the Bhagavat Tattva of Madhvacharya is very similar. That is, these potencies, vidya and avidya, they're real. They're separate from the Supreme Lord, that's Dvaitavad, but they're his potencies moving under his direction, liberating souls, conditioning souls, and providing them subtle bodies and gross bodies by the pradhan feature of Maya. They're features of Maya, but under his direction. And we'll just back up from an earlier lengthy discussion. Wait a minute. Are they real or they're not real? And if the same, this Mayavad is, are the upadhis real, not real? And either way you look at it, there's a Supreme Lord, and one can say, Krishna is saying, it's not correct to say that the soul is liberated, not liberated, any more than it's correct to say, I'm American, or I'm a sannyasi, or I'm these many years old, or whatever it is. Because those are upadhis. So it's not correct to say I am those things. At the same time, on the other hand, one can say liberated and conditioned, as long as one understands that it's temporal, and it's a feature of Maya that's covering the soul, which has neither liberated nor conditioned any more than Krishna is liberated or conditioned, because that's stated in the previous verse, text 2. I'm not. And living entities are my part and parcel, so they're not. So what is this thing? It's the Maya Shakti that has its divisions of Vidya and Avidya and Pradhan. And we heard some other different divisions. Here comes Shruti Mangara's pretty beautiful illustration. That's the Vidya potency over on that side, on this side. And that's the Avidya potency with her mouth open, screaming. So, Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to the embodied beings, living beings. Can we focus this image better? The letters are fuzzy. Look at that lady's got a sika, it looks like. Yet she's screaming. So she's got an empty head and the other one's got books in her head. That's the knowledge lady. She looks pretty equipoised. Okay. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is not different from his potencies, yet he is always above them as the Supreme Controller. The Supreme Personality of Godhead may be designated as mukta, or liberated, only to indicate that he is eternally free from material contamination, and never to indicate that the Lord has been freed, meaning became freed from actual entanglement in a material situation. And one more. This is a really good one. The vidya and avidya potencies of the Lord are stated to be creations of Maya because they carry out the functions of the Lord's potencies. The vidya potency engages living entities in the Lord's pastimes, whereas the avidya potency engages the living entities in forgetting the Lord and merging into darkness. So that fellow's holding on to looks like, a helium balloon or something. And that's the vidya potency, it's lifting him up. And on his left leg, or at least his toe is touching it, is the avidya potency, looks like an anchor. And then there's a signboard beneath, both say avidya. It's pulling him down, and the vidya potency is pulling him up. And we're neither. Pretty clever. I don't know how she comes up with these graphics, but it's really good. Makes it really clear. So we're going to move on to the next verse tomorrow. Whoops, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's something else. Next time we do this, Tuesday. Wednesday, it's going to be Wednesday. But it continues the theme. What's the question? Nitya Siddha Nitya Bada, how does that work? So we would say, well, this term Nitya is not in the absolute sense of Nitya. It's in the relative sense of Nitya. Then it's not Nitya, it's relative sense. But it's appropriate to an extent, describing the temporal situation. Well, then it's not Nitya. Okay, you could just say Badha. But so that it invites the fall of the jiva question, by the way. And in previous classes, we went over some of Druta Karma's analysis of all of this in the Our Original Position book, and with commentaries by 16 different acharyas on these verses. These are really important verses. Like, who are we, what's our situation, and what's Maya, and how we interact with it, and how does it happen? And, if you're not a philosopher, you go like, forget it, man. But it has everything to do with, it's a very interesting subject, because, let's say, in our Western world, and then in turn, filtering into India through the expansion of Christianity, comes this idea of the fall of Adam and Eve. So, is it an allegory? or if it, is it real? And if it even is an allegory, how do we understand it? And how do we get in this condition? And if you say, well, it depends how you answer that question. What do you do next? Do you go with your left foot or your right foot? In which direction? What's the process of salvation or getting out of suffering? And if you're a Buddhist, you just give it a bad name. It doesn't exist. Nothing exists. So it's relevant to becoming freed from the unwanted part of our existence, the suffering part. So what's the not suffering? What is it? Is it simply cultivation of knowledge? Is that the door to get out? It's clear that from the Bhagavatam, Jnane prayasam udapasya. You have to udapasya. You have to cast it far away. But we're here, here we are reading this philosophy and reading commentaries, and so are we double talking? Are we cultivating knowledge, or are we not cultivating knowledge? We're cultivating bhakti. Knowledge without bhakti bears no fruit. It's a temporal situation once again. So we're moving back and forth between eternal and temporary, like. Very, very cleverly and conveniently moving back and forth. So, which is it? Or, put that question on hold and go to, how do I become happy? And what's happiness? That's very relevant. And supposing we don't have a clear idea, then we may go up for a bit and we'll come back down again. That's common. We go up for a bit and we go back down again, and we're struggling, and the whole program. I can share this with you. In this past while in St. Louis, and before that in Naperville, it probably came up like 10, 15 times, whatever the number. People saying the same thing, I go up and then I go back down again. How do I stay up? I don't see that I don't feel I'm making progress because I go up and then I come back down again. And what am I doing wrong, or why does that happen, and how do I do it right? I've been using this phrase, "I'm not there yet, club." You're a card-carrying member. I'm not there yet, club. So how do we get there where we don't just sink back down again? Conditioned by, the things that are conditioned by the modes of material nature, primarily. We're conditioned by the modes of material nature. We don't want to be conditioned by them. How do you get free from that conditioning? How do you become really experience real happiness? Mad bhaktim labate param brahmabhuta prasanatma nasochati nakangsati samaksarveshu bhuteshu. Mad bhakt, then devotional service begins. What are we doing now? Then pure devotional service begins. So how do we get to that? Beyond the up and down stage. It's practical. So if you don't have a clear understanding, then chances are you'll continue the up and down program. And now the clear understanding isn't just by becoming academically astute. It's by bhakti. Because the explanation is there, we've heard it so many times, but it's somehow we're still doing the up and down program. So bhakti is the leverage that will take us out. And that's why this is here. Nice graphic, huh? We're being pulled in both directions. Knowledge isn't sufficient. So when we hear knowledge from a transcendentalist, we hear knowledge presented by Krishna to Uddhava or Krishna to Arjuna, it's knowledge combined with bhakti or devotional service. Until then, it's going to be a mystery. let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. It's very wonderful to hear you and the preparation that you put on in this subject matter. I was just thinking that in the Ishopanishad, it is explained that the worst of the worst is the person who poses himself as someone who will give vidya, but is actually giving avidya. And they're the lowest of the lowest. And, you know, the Acharya, Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Prabhupada go to such an extent to actually counteract this type of avidya. And Prabhupada, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. So I wonder if you can explain Krishna's strategy. One may ask the question, how is that he came with that strategy of...
How did what?
He came, Krishna, with a strategy of sending Lord Shiva to, you know, establish this Mayavadi philosophy.
It's Kali Yuga. It accelerates Kali Yuga. Now, why does Krishna accelerate? Why does Krishna even have a Kali Yuga? He could say, look, no Kali Yuga anymore. No more ignorance. Period. Because he reciprocates with the desires of living entities. He doesn't wish it. He doesn't wish the material world. Why creation? Living entities wish it. So he instructs Lord Shiva, help me out. I'm reciprocating with the living entities. Go teach this thing. Why does Krishna come and teach Buddhism in Kali Yuga? You know, it's something better than a free fall. And when it's free fall, it's really scary. So, you know, it's something better than. So, you know, why have it? Why even have ignorance? Just take away the free will of living entity. Come on. Then you don't have love. So you got to have love. It's got to have free will. To have free will, you can misuse it. There are different choices on the menu. All the way over? All the way.
I understand that we are trying to cultivate bhakti in...
You got to hold the microphone closer.
I understand that we are trying to cultivate bhakti and not knowledge. I'm trying to understand what's the role of meditation in this whole process.
It's what meditation is what the mind does. Knowledge is what the intelligence does. And knowledge can help guide the mind. Intelligence can help guide the mind. So you need both. You need to read Bhagavad Gita and you need to chant Hare Krishna. Mantra meditation. And see the deity and worship the deity. And it's the mind. Manmana. Built into the Manmana instruction, you unpack it, and you have to have, you know, properly guided intelligence to think of Krishna, because otherwise, the mind's going to go to non-Krishna, because the intelligence is out to lunch, or material intelligence. The mind's going to go to material things. So fixing the mind is essential.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was just appreciating Srila Prabhupada's Bhaktivedanta purports. This topic of Vidya and Avidya is quite complex in one sense. It took us 4 days to, study and hear.
By the way, it's not Prabhupada's purport. This is
Yes.
okay.
Gopi Parandana Prabhu's.
Okay.
And I was appreciating even Gopi Parandana Prabhu's, statement here. The Vidya potency engages the living entities in the Lord's pastimes, whereas the Avidya potency engages the living entities in forgetting the Lord and merging into darkness. And I was just appreciating how Gopi Parandana Prabhu simplifies it. Like, one of the appreciation is that what Vidya does and what Avidya does. And I was thinking that we have Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's purports, and I was thinking for myself that I'm reading these books, but if it is not deepening my devotion or my service mood towards the Lord, then even the knowledge that I'm receiving is not actually Vidya, because if it's taking me away from Krishna, so it's a very subtle thing. So I was just appreciating.
Yeah. The proof of the pudding. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I just want to clear my understanding. I'm confused.
You want to do what?
Clear my understanding. I'm confused.
No.
It is said Vidya and Avidya are potencies. They are part of Maya.
Yes.
And then which Vidya is it referring to? Identifying with Brahman?
Then what?
So what is this Vidya? Identifying
What is avidya?
No, Vidya.
What is vidya?
Because is it referring to identifying with Brahman?
It depends.
Because here it is saying that Vidya and Avidya are potencies of Maya, creations of Maya, and then it is saying that Vidya potency engages the living entity in the Lord's pastime.
That's why I said it depends. Now let me clarify that answer. There, just like we read, when from Krishna's perspective, or from a Vaishnava perspective, when it says, when the celebrating Vidya, it implies with bhakti. However, there's the Maya Bhakti Vidya that is minus bhakti, that helps one identify with Brahman, but it's impermanent. Wait a while, and that living entity that has identified themselves with Brahman finds himself again in avidya, because they haven't taken shelter. Yenirvandaksha vimuktamaninas. You know the verse? Tvayashta bhavad avashuddha. Avashuddha. Avishuddha buddhaya. When one's intelligence is still not shuddhi, avashuddha. Because they haven't taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So, the answer is it can do both, depending upon the orientation towards Krishna. And it can act as a Maya Shakti force, or it can act as a Bhakti Shakti force. Where within Bhakti there's knowledge. In Maya's Bhakti, it's the Maya Shakti dimension. So it's, we're weaving back and forth with one term that has different meanings depending upon the situation or the application. It's similar to what Hemangi's comment was. We're reading the book, but what transformation is taking place? What bhakti is being awakened by that message And that's what we should be looking to. So it can mean both. It can mean either, depending upon. Krunanidhi wants to say something.
Maharaj, I could not catch that you read about 4 division of Shruti that Shankaracharya wanted to put something. So I could not catch.
You want to hear them again?
Say again?
You want to hear what those 4 are again?
Yeah.
I just read it. I'm not familiar with this. How about this? Rather than spending time right now looking it up, I'll find it and send it to you. How's that? Is that what you're looking for? It would take some time to find it unless, Jimana Jivana found it, so he can read it.
This is sadhana chatushtaya, a fourfold practice. It's a fourfold sadhana consisting of discrimination, dispassion, quote, the 6 achievements, I don't know what that is, and eagerness for liberation.
Okay? Krishna, Archana, anything? I thought so.
It seems a kind of reasonable argument in some sense from the Mayavadi perspective to have this idea that being told that one is Brahman can somehow uplift one's consciousness, and then reading the Shastras or the Shrutis or whatever section they're reading, that it's uplifting consciousness to help one to identify with Brahman or spirit. It seems a reasonable idea, but I suppose the biggest problem is that there is recognition that there's identification with the body in some sense, this idea of identification. So it seems a very huge jump to go from having those identifications to shifting to I am spirit or Brahman, and just from reading the Shrutis. So I guess that's the part that Srila Jiva Goswami is addressing from the point of view of the quoting from Bhagavad Gita, the modes of material nature working, etc., because I guess that's the part that's not covered by the Mayavadis. Is that correct? That jump from the breaking of the upadhis or those identifications to actually seeing oneself, or identifying oneself as spirit.
It's certainly a big jump. But just a comment on your comment is to navigate the territory of I'm not the body, but I'm going to use it in service to Krishna. That's the slippery slope too. Because one can easily say, but that's not one's consciousness. So it's consciousness transformation. But so what's the method for consciousness transformation? Ours is using things in Krishna's service, and theirs is calling it a bad name. So it's a big jump to use things in Krishna's service instead of, all the other sense enjoyment, contemplating objects as potential happiness of some kind or another, depending on the modes of nature. So the process, like chapter 12, Bhagavad Gita. The process of bhakti is stronger because we get Krishna's help. It's still a big jump, but we get Krishna's help. If indeed the consciousness is to connect with Krishna, then that Krishna's help is there. It's still a big step. So how are we doing online? You have something. Let's just do online. Our poor online people feel neglected, and we'll come back.
This is from Radha Kunj Bihari Prabhu. The soul is full of knowledge, vidya. How can we understand that vidya is a product of Maya?
How can you understand it on the authority of Krishna saying so? I mean, the teaching that Krishna is giving that's just before this is, it's an imposition. So there is the state of being liberated, but becoming liberated. That's a material potency. But the being liberated means bhakti. So then it's not a material potency anymore. The oscillation between day and night, or hot and cold, or pleasure, pain, or that's the illusory energy. Duality is so it's part of the duality of liberated, not liberated. Then what's the living entity? Bhakti discloses what the living entity is.
So this is from Uddhava Bhakta Prabhu. One who has bhakti has vidya. That means vidya, or the essence of vidya, as in the case of the gopis or devotees who are not very literate, but very attached to Krishna. Is that correct?
It's a comment.
He's asking if his comment is correct.
Well, as long as you're saying, back to an earlier question, or back to what's over here, as long as that vidya that the devotee has is with the implied understanding that there's bhakti within that bhakta that has knowledge, then the answer is yes, your understanding is correct.
So he's asking this from my understanding. Technically speaking, can Mayavadis be called atheists?
Yes.
Because they say everything.
Oh, yeah. Not a theist.
Maya is our friend or foe.
Maya is what?
Maya is our friend or our foe.
Yeah.
Depending on our attitude towards the Lord. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Amar Mataji asked, even if I don't have knowledge or understanding...
Even if I do what?
Even if I don't have knowledge or understanding of certain principles, but try to follow because it is the Acharya's instructions...
That's a service principle. Otherwise, you're not going to follow. Next.
My question is, am I taking responsibility of my part?
Sometimes we are, and sometimes we aren't.
Okay. This is from Atulya Mataji. In regards to reading Srila Prabhupada's books, my faith is that just as when one takes medicine, it will have its effect whether I have a deep clarity on how it works. Similarly, reading Srimad Bhagavatam. there will be purification and increased devotion to Krishna,
Yeah.
even though I do not have a clarity on how it works.
Yes.
Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah. And as is true, my understanding is, as is true even in the Ayurveda process, one's faith in the Ayurvedic doctrine and the medicine of the Ayurvedic doctrine means it will work more effectively, more rapidly. Same, the faith factor. It's like this seeing these fourfold, an eagerness to achieve liberation. Having faith that this is going to get me there has a greater or lesser effect. Okay, Prabhupada ki jai.